The Temple Mount is in our hands. We are in Jerusalem and we are here to stay.
Tell me about your two flags.
So this is a flag of the third temple, which we want to build, hopefully here on the Temple Mount.
This is our city. It is forever our city. It will never be divided again, and there will be no Palestinian state.
5 animals arrived in Israel in 2022 that nobody was talking about. By 2026, one of them could trigger events that would reshape the entire Middle East. And almost nobody sees it coming. Right now, as tensions rise across Jerusalem, something quiet is happening. It's not on major news networks. It's not trending on social media. But religious scholars, archaeologists, and government officials are watching closely. They understand what's at stake. For nearly 2,000 years, one ancient requirement made rebuilding the temple impossible. Then, in a ranch in Texas, something changed everything. The arrival of these animals wasn't accidental. It wasn't random. And the timing is raising questions that go far beyond religion. This is the story of how ancient prophecy, modern preparation, and geopolitical tension are converging in ways most people don't understand yet. What happens next could reshape world events. But first, you need to understand what's actually happening on the ground in Jerusalem right now. To understand what's happening in 2026, we need to go back to one of the oldest commands in the Bible. In the book of Numbers, God gave Israel a specific instruction unlike any other. It wasn't about building armies or governing cities. It was about purity. The command was simple but precise. Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring thee a red heifer without spot, wherein is no blemish, and upon which never came yoke. Numbers 19:2. This wasn't symbolic. This was real. The heifer had to meet extremely strict requirements. Completely red, no defects, never used for labor. Even one hair of a different color would disqualify it. Any physical imperfection meant it couldn't be used. Here's where it gets important. This heifer was to be sacrificed outside the camp, completely burned, its ashes mixed with water. This mixture became the water of purification. In ancient times, anyone who touched a dead body became ceremonially unclean. Without this purification, priests couldn't serve. Temple worship couldn't function. And according to Jewish law, there was no alternative method. This single requirement became the greatest obstacle to rebuilding the temple for 2,000 years. After the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 AD, the practice stopped completely. Generations passed, empires rose and fell. Jerusalem changed hands multiple times. But the command in Numbers 19 never went away. It was waiting. For nearly 2,000 years, it was waiting. Jewish tradition teaches that only a small number of red heifers were ever sacrificed throughout history. Finding one that met all the requirements was nearly impossible. The standards were that strict. So for centuries, the temple remained in ruins, and the command remained unfulfilled. To understand why 2026 is significant, you need to understand what's been missing for 2 millennia. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people have lived without a functioning temple. No daily sacrifices, no serving high priest, no priests entering the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. Generations were born and died knowing these things only through scripture and tradition. Children learned about temple worship in religious school, not from lived experience. The temple had become history, not reality. But something extraordinary has been happening in secret for the past few decades. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has been preparing, not rushing, not speculating, but carefully preparing according to ancient biblical instructions. They have recreated the priestly garments described in Exodus, sacred robes, the breastplate with 12 stones. Every detail matches the ancient designs. They've crafted the golden menorah, the 7-branched candelabrum that stood in the temple for centuries. They've created the altar of incense, the table of showbread, musical instruments for temple worship, all of it prepared. But here's what most people don't realize. Priests have also been identified and trained. Descendants of the tribe of Levi, men from priestly families. They've been educated in ancient temple laws and procedures that haven't been practiced in 2,000 years. A high priest has even been selected. He's waiting, ready, trained to perform rituals that no living person has ever witnessed. Yet despite all this preparation, despite the robes, the vessels, the trained priests, nothing could begin. Nothing. Because of one single thing, the red heifer. Without it, no priest could serve. Without it, no sacrifice could be offered. Without it, the temple couldn't function. This wasn't a symbolic checkpoint. This was the foundation. Everything depended on it. In September 2022, something remarkable happened. 5 young red heifers were transported to Israel from a ranch in Texas. This wasn't done secretly, but it was done carefully. These animals were selected because they appeared to meet the strict biblical criteria. They were red. They showed no visible defects. The ranch that raised them specialized in breeding animals that matched ancient Jewish requirements. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. When the heifers arrived in Israel, they weren't kept in public view. They were transported to controlled facilities, protected areas, away from crowds, away from controversy. Their environment was strictly monitored, climate controlled, their health tracked constantly, because even the smallest change could disqualify them. The slightest physical defect would make them unusable. One white hair mixed into their red coat, a small wound, any sign of labor or injury, any flaw would invalidate years of preparation. So their handlers watched them carefully. Every day, every detail mattered. By 2024, the heifers were growing. By 2025, they were approaching maturity. The minimum age required for sacrifice according to Jewish law is 3 years old. As 2026 arrived, the first of these animals were reaching that critical threshold. Here's what made this significant. In nearly 2,000 years, no red heifer had been found that met all the biblical requirements. Not one. The standards were too strict. The requirements are too specific. And then, suddenly, 5 heifers arrived from Texas that possibly met every single criterion. Religious scholars began paying attention. News spread quietly through theological communities. The Temple Institute confirmed they were monitoring the animals. Jewish organizations in Israel made official statements. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was a documented fact. If even one of these animals remained without blemish at 3 years old, it would mark the first valid red heifer in approximately 2,000 years. The implications were staggering, not just for religious Jews, but for geopolitical stability in the Middle East, for prophecy interpretation, for understanding where we are in history. The moment was approaching, and the world was watching, even if most people didn't know what they were looking at. But here's what most news outlets missed completely. The Temple Institute wasn't just waiting passively. For decades, they'd been preparing in ways that nobody fully understood. Their work began in the 1980s. Decades before the Texas heifers arrived, they studied ancient texts, Jewish law, temple architecture. They didn't rush. They documented everything. They wanted to be ready if the moment came. The first priestly garments were completed in the 1990s, crafted by Israeli weavers using techniques from ancient times. The breastplate with its 12 gemstones. Each stone corresponds to one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Researchers studied ancient dyes. They wanted the colors to match what the original high priests wore. By the 2000s, the temple vessels were being crafted. The golden menorah was completed. The altar of incense. The table of showbread. Each item was created according to specific biblical measurements. Craftsmen worked from scripture itself, treating it as the blueprint. None of this work was secret. It was public, but almost nobody was paying attention. The Temple Institute published their research. They gave interviews. They had a museum, but the mainstream media largely ignored it. It seemed too extreme, too prophetic, too impossible. Who would seriously prepare to rebuild a temple on one of the most contested pieces of land on Earth? Yet by 2020, something shifted. The preparations accelerated. More funding appeared. More researchers joined. The Texas heifers arrived in 2022. It was as if everything was being coordinated toward a single moment. By 2026, the Temple Institute had accomplished what many thought impossible. The priestly robes were ready. The vessels were ready. The trained priests were ready. The high priest was selected and waiting. But the most crucial piece remained, the red heifer. Without it, all of this preparation meant nothing. Without it, no service could begin. Without it, 2,000 years of waiting would continue. And in 2026, the moment of testing was approaching. The first heifer was nearly 3 years old. Within weeks or months, it would be examined by Jewish authorities. A detailed inspection, every inch of its body checked. Would it pass? Would it remain blemish-free? Or would it fail, like every other heifer for 2,000 years? The answer would determine everything that came next. If one of these heifers passes inspection in 2026, a specific ceremony must take place. According to Jewish law, the red heifer cannot be sacrificed on the Temple Mount itself. It must be taken to the Mount of Olives, to a specific location outside the temple compound. Descendants of Aaron, the high priests of ancient times, would prepare themselves. They would follow purification rituals outlined in Scripture. The animal would be sacrificed in a controlled ceremony. Every detail would follow ancient Jewish law exactly. Then something profound would happen. The animal would be burned entirely, every part, nothing wasted. The ashes would be carefully collected, precious, sacred, treated as the most important substance created in 2,000 years. These ashes would then be mixed with water. This mixture would become the water of purification. Once created, this water would allow the purification process to begin for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. Priests could be ritually cleansed. The temple vessels could be purified. The path toward temple service would open. And that's when things would escalate rapidly. Because with purification complete, there would be nothing stopping the temple preparations from moving to the next phase. The Temple Institute had already designed the third temple according to the prophet Ezekiel's vision. Detailed plans, architectural drawings, specifications for every dimension. By 2026, these weren't theoretical documents. They were construction-ready blueprints. Once purification occurred, the next step would be obvious: begin construction. On the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock currently stands, where the Islamic world's third most holy site exists. This is where geopolitical reality becomes crucial. Building a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount would not be a religious event. It would be a global crisis. Muslims consider al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock sacred beyond measure. Christians have their own interpretations of what should happen on that land. Jews believe it's their ancient inheritance. For decades, the status quo has been maintained. A careful balance. The Israeli government controls security. Islamic authorities manage the compound. Everyone maintains the peace through acceptance of the current arrangement. But once a valid red heifer was sacrificed, the momentum would shift. The spiritual justification would be complete. The practical obstacles would begin to fall away, and the dormant conflict would awaken. By late 2025, tensions in Jerusalem were already escalating. Jewish extremist groups were making public statements about reclaiming the Temple Mount. They weren't hiding their intentions. They were openly discussing plans to take control of the Dome of the Rock compound. These groups claimed they had the protection of Israeli security forces. Whether that was accurate or just perception didn't matter. The message was clear: something was being prepared. The status quo was being challenged. The Jordanian Waqf, the Islamic trust that officially manages the al-Aqsa Mosque compound, began issuing warnings. They called the planned incursions violations of the existing agreement. They demanded that Israeli authorities prevent what was coming. But preventing it was becoming more complicated. Political pressure within Israel was mounting. Certain factions had become emboldened. They saw the red heifer situation as a sign. A moment was coming. They believed they had a window to act, and they were organizing. International observers were watching nervously. The situation on the Temple Mount had always been volatile. Any escalation here could trigger regional conflict. Egyptian, Saudi, and Jordanian governments issued statements urging restraint. The Palestinian Authority condemned what they called extremist plans. But the momentum was building. It wasn't organized by a single group. It was more organic than that. Decades of preparation by the Temple Institute, the arrival of the red heifers. The trained priests waited. The temple vessels are ready. Religious fervor building. Political factions mobilizing. By mid-2025, Israeli authorities were aware that something significant was approaching. The first red heifer was being examined. If it passed, the next steps would follow quickly. Days, weeks at most. The quiet preparation was about to become very loud. The world was about to understand what had been happening for 4 years. And they weren't prepared for what came next. If a valid red heifer is confirmed in 2026, the next 12 months would reshape Middle Eastern geopolitics. This isn't speculation. This is following the logical sequence of events that the Temple Institute itself has outlined. First, the purification ritual would occur. Ashes would be created. This would happen within days of confirmation. Second, the momentum would become unstoppable. With the primary spiritual obstacle removed, the justification for moving forward would be complete. Not just for religious Jews, but for Christian Zionists and others who interpret prophecy. The path would be clear. Third, the construction question would become unavoidable. The Temple Mount cannot hold both the Dome of the Rock and a Jewish temple. Physical space doesn't allow it. So a choice would have to be made. Israeli authorities would face pressure, international pressure, religious pressure, political pressure. The Dome of the Rock would have to be removed. That's not a metaphor. That's a physical reality. And that action would trigger a response from the Islamic world that hasn't been seen in decades. By late 2025 or early 2026, the Middle East could be in crisis. Not because of miscalculation, but because of intention, because a plan that has been developing for decades would reach its critical moment. Prophecy scholars have been discussing this scenario for years. Some believe it leads to regional war. Others believe it leads to something larger. But the convergence of the red heifer, the temple preparations, and the geopolitical reality means that 2026 marks a threshold. The world is about to watch something unfold that was written about thousands of years ago. The question isn't whether it will happen. By 2026, the question is only when, and how the world responds. But there's another layer to understand. This isn't just about politics or territory. For many believers, 2026 represents something spiritual converging with the physical world. Christian theologians have connected the red heifer to Christ directly. In the book of Hebrews, it says, "For if the blood of bulls and of goats, and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean, sanctifieth to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God?" The red heifer purified the outward body. Jesus purifies the heart. The heifer had to be without blemish. Jesus was without sin. The heifer was rare. Christ was unique. This creates a spiritual paradox. For religious Jews, the red heifer represents restoration of ancient practices, the return to temple service, the fulfillment of commanded law. For Christians, it represents a foreshadowing of Christ's work, a type and shadow of something already completed 2,000 years ago. Both groups can look at the same event and see confirmation of their belief system. And both groups are watching 2026 carefully. The prophet Ezekiel described a future temple with precise measurements and detailed specifications. Religious scholars believe this vision describes what's coming, not metaphorically, literally. As these events unfold, believers worldwide are asking the same question. Are we witnessing prophecy in real time? Is history moving according to a pattern written thousands of years ago? By 2026, those aren't theoretical questions anymore. They're immediate ones. 5 animals from Texas, 2,000 years of waiting, decades of secret preparation, all converging at a single moment in 2026. The first red heifer is approaching examination. The Temple Institute is ready. The trained priests are waiting. The political factions are mobilizing. What happens in the next few months will determine whether this remains a footnote in religious history or whether it becomes the event that reshapes the Middle East. The world is watching in silence, but not for much longer, because 2026 is the year everything changes. And the first sign of that change might be happening right now.